Cool. Yeah, so in this session, we'll be talking through what I've learned on this journey as I got to grips with mapping and drones and kind of some basic mapping techniques and more kind of high-tech drone mapping techniques. And I'll introduce you to these topics. This is coming from the point of view of like me as someone that moved to a piece of land and wanted to design it into a regenerative ecosystem. So I don't claim to be a mapping expert by any stretch of the imagination. I've learned through doing, and today I'll share with you what I've learned. And feel free to drop some comments, thoughts, suggestions in the chat. We'll also have space at the end to talk about this in more detail and open up for a bit of a discussion. So let me just give a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. So we'll start off with a brief overview of a few key terms that relate to mapping. Then we'll come on to look at a kind of simple mapping methods, starting off with traditional methods and then thinking a bit more about drones. And then we'll have a think about like why are maps useful in regenerative land design. And finally, I'll share a few case studies from maps that I made with drones on regenerative properties in Scotland. So I'll share my process with you. I'm happy to answer any questions on that at the end too. Cool, so let's dive in. What are the key terms that are important when we're thinking about mapping a piece of land? First term, cartography, and this relates to the process of mapping itself. Cartography, mapping, it's a representation of the physical world, and mapping is something that human beings have done for, well, a very long time. This is the first recorded map from 600 BC. And you can see it's been mapped onto a clay tablet, and it represented a different aspects of this ancient kind of civilization or township into clay. So we can see that mapping the world around us it's ancient, it's part of the human story. And this is something this map here is probably something everyone is familiar with, the world map. This was essential for navigating the globe, for helping people move from one part of the world to the other. Got the Mercator projection here from 1569. And then a more recent example of the same type of world map, the Mulweed projection from 1805. As time has gone on, these maps have got more and more accurate. They've been able to reflect the world in more accurate ways and represent physical geography more accurately over time as technology has improved. And also the tools and the skills that are required to produce maps as technology has improved, they've become accessible to more and more people. And Google Maps is a good example of that. Like Google Maps is a free tool. It's available to anyone. Google Earth Pro also. And you can see here, this term scale is really important when we're thinking about maps. And Google itself, if you zoom in and you zoom out on Google, you can bring up different scales of maps. So here on this scale, looking at New York, not far from you, John. The Brooklyn Bridge, this cafe, and starting off at a 5,000 meter scale, 5 kilometers, then zooming in down to a 50-meter scale, and then the furthest you can zoom in on Google Maps, that's like a close-up of this area, and you can see 5 meter scale. And if you look at the bottom of Google Maps every time you zoom in, you'll notice that the scale of the map changes. So these features are all relevant if we're looking to map a piece of land, or even if we're just picking up an existing map and want to understand what it represents. Another key feature, orientation. So this is about the arrangement of the map in relation to the compass. And you'll see on most maps they'll have a north on there, so you know that this way is north. Then you can relate that to the ground that you're working with. Alongside orientation, we've got the key and the legend. So in this example here, you can see we've got a map with different features and a key on the side that helps the person using this map to identify what does this map show. So the key and the legend is crucial if we're making our own maps. It's an important term to bear in mind. And then we have topography. So the topography relates to changes in elevation across the landscape. This is a topographical map. It's kind of more of a design that represents the different topographies across the United States of America, just to highlight how every different part of this landscape has a different elevation. It's at a different height above sea level, and this topography is represented on maps. The way that this is represented is through contours, and mapping contours is one of the things that first brought me into to be interested in maps and in drone mapping. It was like, how do we map elevation across a landscape if it's an undulating piece of land, which if you've ever been to Scotland, almost all land in Scotland is pretty bumpy. So this becomes really important, and contours are used on maps to identify different levels of elevation across the landscape and the distance between them. So in this case, every contour is 50 meters in height elevation. So we've got 2,000, then we go up 50 meters, and we've got another contour. So every single, like this line represents this elevation, 2,250 meters, all the way up to the highest point of elevation on this peak. So let's come on to think a bit about, like, how do we map? What are some simple methods we can use to map? When we're mapping, there's this balance to be found between the cost of something, of a mapping technique, and the complexity of it. And depending on the needs of our project, we might choose a different solution. So I've kind of mapped out here on this graph, on this chart, like from the simplest to the most complex mapping techniques, and I'll just talk through them one by one. So starting off down here, like if we're talking about something that's totally free and not that complex, you can just go out onto your land and just spend time there and get to know it, and just get out a pen and paper and basically draw what you see. And in certain situations, that might be all you need. Like you don't necessarily need to go out and spend a fortune to make a useful map. You can just draw what you see, and that can help you with your land design project. However, as the complexity of, or as you move deeper into a land design project or a generative land design project, you might start to be curious about, like, well, how does the water flow across this landscape? How does the terrain affect the plants that I want to grow in this landscape? Or how productive is this land in this different part of the landscape? And perhaps the elevation is such that there's different microclimates related to the elevation, depending on how big your piece of land is and how much of a change in elevation you've got. So although this can be good for simple kind of projects, the more complex the projects get, the more you might want to look to other tools. Obviously, this is free. You can just go and do it off your own back, like get a bit of paper and a pen and crack on. If there's a piece of land that you want to map, and there's you've got a specific need, and we've got I think Daniela's still in the chat, so maybe we can talk about this at the end when we get to the discussion point. But there's a tool called Contour Map Generator. It's not very complex to use at all. It's very simple, but there's a small fee attached, so it's not free like it would be if you just go and like map your land with a pen and paper. But you can type your kind of postcode into that program, and it will generate useful contour maps and other maps for you based on your geographical location. And we can maybe come back to think about that at the end if Daniel is up for giving a short intro. We've also got Google Earth Pro. That's free, but the amount of information you can take from Google Earth Pro is going to be dependent on how much you understand the platform and how you can navigate it. You can teach the tool is simple if you want to just go from A to B in a city, but if you want to really deep dive into the software and use it to map a piece of land, there's a learning curve, but it's free. Then we have A-frames and bunyips, which we'll come to talk about in the following slide. These are very low-tech traditional methods for mapping across contours, and I'll explain to you in a little while how those work. Along this complexity line, if you want to get more complex but free, there's also QGIS, a mapping tool, which I guess they're like Danilo and maybe Jason, an MRV team, consulting team from Fifth World. I'm sure all you guys are very familiar with this tool, QGIS. Very, very powerful tool, but again, steep learning curve if you wanna get to grips with it. I have looked at it a few times and went like, wow, this is really complex, and gone back to Google Earth Pro. But for the experts, the people that know what they're doing, it's a very, very, very powerful tool. Then we've got getting into the realm of drones, and the cost of a drone is like super cheap these days. You can pick up a drone for like $50 or $100. But if there's a distinction to be made here in terms of the type of drone mapping that you want to do, for low cost and low complexity, you can use a drone to take an aerial image of your piece of land and use that as the basis to do a little bit of design on top of it, put some features on the landscape. It doesn't have any kind of contours on it or any geographical kind of features other than just the image, but it's very, very useful and a very cheap way to go about creating a basic map of your land. Then as we move up this cost and complexity scale, you can get into the area of actual drone mapping. And we'll talk about this in detail. That involves using a drone, a consumer drone at the higher end of the consumer market, where you can, and a piece of software, free software that will take a map of your land and it can be made to be very, very accurate in terms of contours and in terms of geographical features, and I'll show you a bit more later on how that can be achieved. And then going up again in terms of complexity and cost, we get into like the civil engineering world, and in this area we've got like LiDAR drones, we've got mapping of vegetation, NVDI, GPS, high kind of high-level GPS, like the kinds used for doing road projects and bridge projects. And then we've got like super high-end drones with corrections so that they're producing maps that are accurate down to the millimeter level or certainly centimeter level in real time. These products are extremely expensive. LiDAR drones also are very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars. Plus, there's also a kind of complexity to using these tools, and it's a profession in and of itself, providing maps of this nature. So in this session today, we're not going to go there with this stuff. This is like high-end complex mapping. What we're focusing on is more like down this end, where we're thinking of like how can we use a consumer drone to create a map, and also what uses might aerial photography with drones have in the regenerative land design space. Cool. So let's move on to think about the most low tech kind of end of the scale. These two tools here have been used for like centuries, I guess. I couldn't say exactly when they started being used, but they're like super low tech solutions to measure a piece of land that has the same elevation. So you can see here with this A-frame that you have two pieces of wood and a crossbar and a piece of string hanging down with a weight on it. And when those two sides of the A-frame are level, the string obviously it sits right in the middle. And you can so when if it's like tilted like that, the string goes off the level. That means that you can create a very simple line of contour across a piece of land very easily. A very low cost technique. You can even use sticks and string, but you can use that to map out a piece of land. Obviously, the downsides to this are it's useful on a very small scale, but when you get up to farm scale, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to map a farm with just this tool. We also have bunyips. Bunyips are similar to A-frames in that they also find a point of equal elevation on a landscape, but this time using water. So you can see on this diagram here, if these two posts are not level, the water doesn't marry up across these two posts. But on here, this is a level piece of ground between two sides, and the water is balancing out on the posts. And then between those 2 points, you've got a contour line. So I was really into sorry, one moment. I think the video, I'm just going to start with the video because it's already started playing. So I was really into A-frames. Can I pause this? Yeah, I can. There we go. I wanted to experiment with A-frames to see in my garden, like when I was making a forest garden, I wanted to see if I could use a low-tech method to find the contours on my land. So what I did was, this is my son, this is my garden, and we made an A-frame together. And this is it here, this is us putting it together. And then what I decided to do was map out the contours in my garden with, I could have used paint, I could have spray painted the line, or I could have used flags or something, but I wanted something that I could see from a drone image. So I decided to use flour, and I'll show you how we went about that in this video here. This is me and my kids mapping out. This is like the fourth or fifth contour. So we went round the garden and we mapped out different contour lines across it to get a sense of the shape of the land and how water flows across it. You can see here, this is my son getting the flower and connecting the lines between the 2 points on the A-frame. And we did this across the whole garden. And I'll show you in a bit what this looked like from above. You can see on this video that the string is like, it does settle right in the center. And it's a very effective, low-cost method of finding a contour line. So you can see here, that process that we went through in that video is reflected in these contour lines in the garden. And this brings us on to the next kind of method. So that's the first method, like low cost, low tech, traditional mapping methods for contours using A-frames and bunyips, in this case an A-frame. And then we come on to a low cost, high tech approach to mapping, which is to use a consumer drone, basically any drone that's got a camera on it. And I've seen on eBay, you can pick these up extremely cheap these days. Small drones with cameras, just put it up in the air and you can take an image of your land. And in this case, you can see that these white lines are the white lines we made with the flower. And this shows us how so that the land is kind of going downhill in a particular way. These lines represent the same elevation across the land. And you can see like the shape of this land. And this helped me in a number of ways, which I'll talk about later on in terms of the regenerative land design, because I was able to work out how the water is likely to flow across here based on the shape of the land. And this is kind of like off the shot here, but the garden actually falls away into into a steep woodland. So the whole garden is like falling off into the wood, and the water is like flowing across the landscape into the wood. There's a stream at the bottom, and we decided to put a pond down here based on the shape of the land. Another way you can use aerial photography that I talked about earlier is that this looks really scrappy and DIY, but it works. You can basically just draw on top of your aerial photographs. In this situation, in this image on the right here, this is our beds. So we planted a number of trees, perennials, and other plants in here. And this was a way of us numbering the beds and deciding what went in each one. So in this situation, this image was much easier than going out and drawing this by hand. We could just draw on top of the digital image. I've also printed off drawn images and drawn on top by hand as well. It does offer a really low cost way to make a base map. This is another example. This is my friend's place. And you can see it was really useful just putting the drone up and getting an image of their vegetable garden. This was used to determine like where to plant within this garden. and there's not any additional techniques needed other than just putting the drone in the air, taking a photo, and then you're ready to go once you upload it to your computer. Okay, so that's like aerial photography for mapping. Let's move on to think a bit about actual drone mapping. So I make a distinction between the aerial photography methods and making a formal map with a drone. If you want to make a map, a geographically accurate map with a drone, there's a few different steps to go through. The first is, and I should say you can do this with a consumer drone, like between $500 to $1,000 drone. Like you don't need to spend thousands and thousands on a drone to achieve this. But there are certain steps to go through to get an accurate map out of the process. The first step is to plan the flight. That means plan the area that you want to cover, that you want to map, and determine how high you want to go. This will reflect on like how detailed the map is. Obviously, the higher you go, the bigger the area you can cover, but the lower the resolution of the map will be. This is called the ground sampling distance, and I'll briefly touch on this later on. Then we've got the second stage. So sorry, briefly, just to add, in the flight planning stage, you can do this within an application. The app that I commonly use is called the Pix 4D Capture Pro. It's free on Android and Apple Store, and it will help you plan a map kind of flight using this tool. I'll show you in a moment what that looks like. Then secondly, we've got ground control points. Ground control points are known coordinates on the ground that you basically fix these points, and you take a GPS, and a very accurate GPS, and these ground control points make the whole map much more accurate, coming down to like centimeter accuracy in many cases and below. This method of adding ground control points is not essential, but it does add a lot of value to the map if you're looking for accuracy and ground truth. Then the third step is image processing. So you go out, you take your images, the drone does its mission, it comes back, and then you upload the images to the computer program, and it processes them and turns them into the finished product, which is a very high quality map. And then finally, if you want to take it a step further, you can actually take those images and turn them into a 3D model. I haven't experimented with this myself, but there are people out there who can take the work that you do or the images you generate from the drone and turn it into a very useful 3D model. Okay, so let's think briefly about like this flight planning stage. What's really important here is the type of drone that you choose. If you want to make an accurate map, ideally you want a drone that's got a mechanical shutter on it. A lot of the consumer drones, the very cheap ones, have an electronic shutter, which what happens is as the drone is flying along, if it's got an electronic shutter, it blurs the map. So with a mechanical shutter, the quality you get is higher. The drone that I use for this purpose is called a Phantom 4 Pro. It's not available new anymore, although there's a Phantom Pro V2, I think, but you can pick them up secondhand on eBay and stuff. This was a a very, very popular drone to use for mapping, and it still is based on the cost to quality of output. And you can see like down here, there's an RTK drone that's used by civil engineers. This costs like well, last time I checked, $6,000 plus for this drone, and it uses the same base kind of hardware as this. The only difference is it has the kind of high accuracy GPS on top of it. But you can do a lot of the same stuff with this much cheaper drone than you can do with this very, very high-end drone. There's also other models. So this is a DJI kind of brand. You can map with the Parrot brand. Parrot and Nafi is quite popular too. And the tool that I use, as I mentioned before, is Pix 4D Capture. It's a free tool. They have a support document which shows every single drone that's compatible with their tool. So if you're wanting to buy a drone and you're not sure which to buy, then check out their website. So what does this program look like inside? This is what it looks like. Basically, you go to your land and you move this box to cover the area that you want to map. And these blue lines on here represent the flight path of the drone. So what this program is doing is sending a flight mission to the drone. The drone goes up in the air, it follows that grid pattern, it takes photographs very frequently, so it keeps taking photographs along this blue line, and then it comes back to you, back to where it started, and you have those images to upload for processing. You can see here, you can determine how high you want the drone to fly. Obviously, the higher you go, the more area you cover, but the less detailed it will be. You can also choose how much the images overlap. And the more overlap you have, the higher quality of map you end up with at the end, but the longer the mission will take. We've got here the ground sample distance as well. That's representing what I was mentioning earlier about how high you are affects how each pixel of your map will reflect on the ground. So most drone maps aim for about 1 to 2 centimeters per pixel, which is a much higher resolution than a satellite image or a Google Earth image. Ground control points, just touching on them briefly. These points on the map make it much more accurate, and they basically ground truth the map. If you don't use these, the map can still be useful, but if you wanted to use it for like putting a bridge in, or like knowing exactly on the ground that what your map, where it is on your map, represents what's on the ground, without ground control points, you wouldn't be able to guarantee that accuracy. But if you put these ground control points in, the accuracy and quality of the map is increased exponentially down to centimeter level accuracy and below in many cases. Just briefly, this tool that they're using in the middle here this is a GPS. So they get a GPS coordinate in the middle of this square ground control point. And on this image on the right, every single one of those black and white squares will be a known coordinate. And that will make the drone know, like the drone image, when the images are being processed, those known points will reflect in the quality of the map in how it relates to the ground beneath. Okay, so coming on to the final step, actually, we've got post-processing as well, but coming on to the image processing step. So you've been out in the fields, you've taken your drone map, and you've taken your images and you want to produce a map. There are a number of tools out there that can help you do that. A lot of them are paid tools. I've found that I've played around with a lot of the trials on these tools. For my purposes, I wasn't going to be doing a lot of maps, and they were really expensive tools. So I didn't feel it was worth it. That led me to look for open source alternatives, and I found this open source tool called Open Drone Map. And what this can do is take all your images and produce a very high quality map. And I'll show you some examples of this later, but this is one of the maps I took. On the where it's kind of lighter green, these are the drone images, and the quality, that how far you can zoom in on this is much higher than it is on Google. And you can see in this map, like I didn't use ground control points, and you can see the impact of this. Like if you look at the road doesn't quite match up with where the road is on Google Maps. If I had put ground control points in this map, it would have stretched and it would map perfectly onto the ground. But for the purposes of this, I didn't need that level of accuracy, so it was fine. So you can see here, just to kind of double click on this point on the quality of the image. On the left here, you've got an image that I took with the drone, and on the right, you've got the same piece of land with Google Maps. And you can see here that this Google Maps image, this Google Earth image is not really cutting it. There are satellite imagery providers that you can go to and buy satellite imagery from, which would likely have higher quality images, but you can see on the left there's a considerable improvement in this map compared to what's possible with Google Earth Pro alone. And even like on this map here, if you zoom in, you can see on the drone map, you can even see my my daughter's bike. But if you zoom in on Google, you just get like a total mess of pixels. So that just highlights how much more you get out of a drone map compared to a Google Earth Pro map. Cool. So post-processing, what can you do with these drone maps after you've generated them? You can turn them into 3D models. And you can see here, this model on the right is kind of very high quality, likely been done by a 3D video editor, but the imagery, or a 3D modeler rather, the imagery has originated from a drone. And you can see on the left here, this is a point cloud. So, and the little dots above are all the points, all the locations where the drone has taken an image of the ground below and generated a kind of series of points which can then be represented in a 3D model. There's a couple of tools that are useful for this. One is called Meshroom, that's open source, and the other is called meta shape. I haven't really played around with this myself, but I know that it's quite popular for drone mappers, particularly in the property industry to generate maps plus 3D models. Cool. So let's have a think about why maps are useful. One of the places I like to start with this is to think about the Yeoman's keyline scale of permanence and thinking specifically about regenerative land design. You can see here that within the scale of permanence, you've got at this end of at the top end of the scale, there's things that take a lot of more energy, effort, and time to shift than the things that down here that are much easier to shift, although they also take some time. Like you can improve soil, for example, by getting new soil, compost if it's on a small scale. And as we go up this scale, we come to this point of the shape of the land. And after climate, this is one of the most significant features of a regenerative land design. And mapping, particularly contour mapping, can have a foundational kind of benefit on all the other areas beneath. So we can determine from the map where the water flows across the landscape, where's the best place to locate roads and drainage, where are the best places to put trees, structures, all the way down to where to plant soils, where to plant plants. We can work back from finding the shape of the land and mapping it out in an effective way using drones and other methods. So in regenerative land design, one of the key things that we often talk about are, and I'm thinking about this from a kind of permaculture slant. One of the things we often talk about is a base map. And on the right here, you can see a drone image that's got a base map, a very basic base map drawn on top of it. And on the left here, we've got a map, a very, very simple primitive map with a simple scale. 4 centimeters on the paper represents 1 meter on the land. And this can help us to plan a whole design. We can also use maps to plan out the zones. And I recommend this video from Andrew Millison on this topic. Zones relating to the different needs and areas of focus within our design. So we could have our house being zone 1, our kind of area immediately around our house being zone 2, then beyond that, our farmland, and then an area that's kind of partly managed in the furthest aspects of the zoning plan, we can have complete wilderness areas. This kind of planning is possible by creating a zone map. Then we've also got sector maps, extremely useful in regenerative land design. You can map out like where the sun is at different seasons, where at different times of year, the flow of wind across the land. And this could be really useful when it comes to deciding where to plant things. And yeah, very useful for multiple different reasons. Okay, so we've got this like idea of maps being useful for regenerative land design. Coming on to think about like what else can we do with mapping and one of the uses for mapping that's emerging within Web3 is to use mapping to generate token rewards and other rewards. So there's this project called Spexy. It launched, it's still in beta, but their website is public, and this is their app. Within this app, you can fly different missions within these little kind of areas. There's different rewards linked to the different area that you fly your drone in. So at this stage, there's a lot of drone pilots out there going out flying and producing imagery. It goes into the network and they receive an incentive for that. And the use case of this platform is to offer aerial imagery through their network so that there will be people coming to access and purchase that imagery. And on the other end, there are drone pilots who are receiving incentives for producing the data. And you can see here, they've already started mapping out large parts of BC in Canada, issuing rewards along the way. Cool. So that's covered the kind of main content. I just want, before we break for questions and discussions, I just want to hop in. I'll come back to these questions in the chat at the end too. But let's dive into these couple of case studies. The first one I want to share with you guys is this place called Burmiston in Scotland. This is my friend's farm. And you can see here, so I went out and created this map of their land. And in the bottom right corner here, you can see this is a Google Map image. In the bottom right is Google, and on the top right is the drone map. That's the same piece of land, and you can see the kind of many improvements in terms of accuracy and I guess just the quality of the image. You can even see on the top right, these are their sheep that came out in the map. So I want to show you guys how I actually did this. This is a screen recording from inside Web ODM, Open Drone Map. And you can see inside Open Drone Map, it gives you Google Earth Pro, and then it overlays your map on top. And to get to this stage, you have to, you go to the dashboard, you input your images that you've taken off the drone, and it automatically generates this map for you. It processes it over time, and it outputs this. And I'll just play this video, which will show some of the different outputs that come out of this program. Totally open source program. There's the sheep. The first thing is this image. Then we've got a plant health map. Now, the accuracy of this is generated by the software. You can get specialized drones for taking plant health that have different types of cameras, but what this is trying to do within the software is show the areas of high vegetation in green, medium in yellow, and like no vegetation or barren land in red. The accuracy of this is useful, but it could, like, for using it for precision agriculture or something, you would need a more specialized drone for that. Then we've got the surface model showing us the terrain of this piece of land. Very useful for planning and deciding how to use the land. Likewise, the terrain model. This is all generated within the platform, within OpenDroneMap. And then finally, it can generate contours for you. And you can see here at 1 meter interval of elevation, there are contour lines on here. Each yellow contour is so there's 1 meter of elevation between the two. Now, what I would say is like the accuracy of this wouldn't be enough to go and like build a house or put in a bridge or something like that, but for the purposes of a basic land design, it can be extremely useful. And also you can make these contours more accurate by adding in ground control points, and also within the Pix4D capture probe software, you can add in elevation points there. So Pix4D capture is free, but if you want to have an even more accurate map, you can pay for a service which will it basically optimizes for contours. I didn't use that in this case, but I think the kind of the output that you get is good enough for many purposes, and for the purposes that my friend needed this, it was more than good enough. Cool, so moving on to the next example, we've got Tango Hat, and this is a place up in the northeast of Scotland. This is where I did my first permaculture residential course. And I mapped out their land. You can see this is a drone shot. It's right next to the sea. And they purchased this field, and I was producing a map of this field, and as well as a very basic 3D model, which I'll show you guys. So this is again OpenDroneMap, totally open source software. It generated the map, the surface model, and it also generated this 3D model inside here. So this is without any editing at all. This is just what got produced by the software when I inputted the images from the drone. So you can see here, this is a point cloud. And then adding texture inside OpenDroneMap. It brings this up. And this was very useful in terms of visualizing, because they planted out this whole area around here with trees, and also this whole area in here. And this model was very useful in visualizing the different elevation in the land. You can kind of see on this model how the land undulates in different areas, how it kind of rises up on this side. And this tool was extremely useful in planning out the design for this land. Okay, and then we've got Comicroft. This is a regenerative market garden, permaculture-based market garden. and mountain bike centre in Scotland. These guys wanted to regenerate this field here on the left, and also in this case, the modeling from Open Drone Map was useful in kind of visualizing the land. We used the contour map as well for determining like what to put where. In the end, these guys decided that they wanted to just let this land regenerate itself by leaving it, which was cool. But this process helped with making that decision. And you can see here there's this terrain model. In here on this terrain model, you can see like an old fence that's not really visible on Google Maps, but it came up in this terrain map on the drone. And also the contours, which you can see like they're not super accurate, like all the way along, but the shape of the land matches accurately enough to make these contours very useful for basic mapping and design. Cool. And finally, before we break for discussion and questions, this is my place in Scotland. It started off like this, which was a very beautiful decorative garden, but you couldn't, like, none of this is edible. And also there was a huge lawn, which was a ton of work in it. Having a young family, it was like so much work to keep on top of everything. I wanted a forest garden that would grow and kind of improve biodiversity and require less energy inputs from me to maintain. So went from this very idyllic kind of garden, which you could say like is the traditional beautiful country garden that people want, but it's a huge amount of work. There's better ways to improve things like biodiversity in the ecosystem. And if you left this ecosystem alone, it wouldn't turn out to look like this at all. This is a human kind of imposition, all these decorative plants. It's a lot of work. It looks nice, but it wasn't what we were looking for. So we decided to build a forest garden. The drones and the mapping were really useful tools in that sense. You can see here that was the A-frame and the contour mapping. I'm not going to go into detail about all the things that we did, but essentially we transformed the land from a decorative garden into a forest garden and perennial ecosystem. And this is what it ended up looking like. So the lawn kind of went, we planted tons of perennials and trees, fruit trees, tons and tons of stuff that's continuing to grow. And there's an intricate water management system, which again, I'm not going to go into, but you can kind of see the basics of that here in the drone map, like down here, similar to what Rob Avis talks about when he in one of his YouTube videos on urban swales. That's what inspired me here. So these are on contour, basically mini swales to capture water on 3 levels and distribute it eventually down to a pond in the bottom left of the garden, and kind of encouraging the water to flow naturally across the land and in channels that irrigates all the plants along the way. So drones really helped us to get there. It's it's still ongoing. We've got yeah, it's a forest garden is never finished. It's just like constantly developing over time. But this is yeah, images of where it was when I left Scotland last year. So that's all the content that I had for you guys. Curious to hear from you, like what you if you have any thoughts on mapping, whether you think like you might want to use any of these tools yourself in your own land design projects, and also happy to answer any questions that or try to answer questions that you may have. There's actually people in the chat who might have a stab answering the questions as well because they'll know more about these things than I do. So yeah, if let me just change these settings so you can unmute yourself. Oh, great. Jason, you wanna
Yeah, well, thank you, Kris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Well, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I have a question regarding the 3D model, well, the point cloud you made. What kind of drone was that you used?
So this was the Phantom 4 Pro.
Okay, yeah, so this one can have the camera tilted, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think if the goal, if anyone is interested to do such a thing, it's better to have those drones that can have a camera tilted to a few degrees of just down below, which
Yeah.
is the nadir. Just if you need to get the facades of the buildings or the trees, walls. I don't know how we can call that. Yeah. I was just wondering because the quality was pretty good. Yeah, then it makes sense.
Yeah. So when I started this, I wasn't setting out to make 3D models. It was kind of like a bonus
Yeah.
when I saw it in the software, I was like, what? Like it just produced it. Like so it was a positive benefit of having the Phantom 4 Pro. And I think you're right about like so there's a mechanical shutter element, but also the way that the tilt of the drone, the camera operates as well. I think a lot of the cheaper drones won't go fully down, and that could have an impact on the map. But yeah, all these maps that I shared with you were made on the Phantom 4 Pro, and I've been quite happy with how it's been operating. And yeah, DJI drones in general, I think the price is coming down on some of them. And even the lower models now, you can do really interesting stuff with them. If you wanted to make like a full high poly, like high quality 3D model, you probably have to like scan the buildings as well. So these maps were just made with me flying a mission using Pix4D capture and then putting it into WebODM. But if you were really serious about modeling, you could probably like scan the buildings and then input that into like, something like one of these 3D modeling platforms that I mentioned, like MeshLab or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah, the flight planning is probably different if the goal is to do the 3D modeling, especially if the camera is tilted. You would like to want different kind of orientation. But well, I don't know the software. Well, any of them actually, none of them. But well, maybe they do also offer to like go around the building to model it more accurately. So yeah, right. Well, I was checking the Phantom 4 right now on Marketplace here in Canada, and it's pretty cheap. Right, there's a lot about like 400 or 500, so be a good option. 100 Canadian dollar, so less than USD.
Jason. Will, did you want to come in?
Yes. So I noticed that you're taking your photos during the growing season. Is there a reason for that?
Um, it was just when I was there on that land. So what another factor, there wasn't any specific reason why I did it at that season. Um, One factor with drone mapping that I didn't really cover is like the weather. So there was a couple of times where I was going to go and like do a map at these places, but it was too windy, so we had to choose a different day. That had an impact, but I wasn't mapping for any particular season or any particular growth or anything like that.
I'll finish and let the other guys, but that's one of the challenges. So we're really focused on like watersheds and drylands, and we have a really tough time. Like we need to see under the tree canopy, and then a lot of times like the water's in a gully. It's like, and so it's really hard to get images whenever it's not shaded. And so I just we've struggled with like kind of timing.
Mm.
But you've this has inspired me to go out and do some more drone mapping. So thank you.
So I think the way that I kind of put this together is like it's super DIY. It's stuff that I've learned on the go. And there's another tier to this. There's a whole industry of people out there doing this professionally. And part of I think under tree canopies and stuff, there's a lot of LiDAR drones that can be useful in those situations as far as I know, but I don't have any experience of using them um, myself. But I know that there are people out there doing that sort of stuff. John.
Hey, Chris, thanks for sharing this. I was actually just looking at Google Maps, my area while you're talking, and turns out the largest floating solar array in North America is just a couple miles from here. And it's being used to treat and pump water. My question is your last point about the irrigation. We get a ton of rain here, and we to the point where we had to put in a drainage system, and most of it's just going off our property, although we've got a couple containers. So can you say a little bit more about like how it sounded like you created channels to effectively irrigate different beds and areas of your yard?
Yeah, so our next community voices, I think it's next week, is going to be on this topic of like water management. So I think we'll get a chance to dive more deeply into that in that session. But from my point of view, in terms of what we did on the land, we were so on the grass, like the lawn, there was like areas where it was becoming super boggy and like there was like it was like water was collecting in different areas. And what I wanted to do was try and store that water and help it to kind of move through the land in a kind of more managed way that was also in keeping with the structure and kind of the underlying structure of the land because I didn't do any land work to change that. Like I didn't raise up the land to make it flat or anything. I was just working with what we had. So we created channels on contour at three different levels, eventually coming down to a pond. So the idea was that rather than the water accumulating in these really boggy areas I mean, we got rid of the lawn anyway, but like we got like the boggy areas went, and the pond became the final kind of destination for the water. And inside those channels, there's a really good video. I mentioned it before by Rob on this on urban swales. And it's like, so there's a lot of talk about swales and permaculture being useful and stuff, but when you come down to a small scale, it's kind of less useful, and it also depends on your climate. Um, in my case, the small kind of channels filled with wood chip. Also, we put large chunks of wood in there, a bit like a hugel bed, and essentially like it was full of biomass, and it had a kind of what do you call them in Canada? A weeping tile, I think you call them in Canada. We call them field drains in Scotland. I had that, like a plastic tube in the bottom of it, just to keep that channel of irrigation open. And it was just to kind of flow, so the water was flowing across the landscape in that way. And we planted different beds all around that down the garden, with the goal of never having to water it. But obviously climate comes into play as well, right? Like we're in Scotland, not in like a super hot, arid climate. So it worked.
Very cool. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, kind of keeping the same conversation going, but my question is about scale. So a couple of your examples, like the one where you had flatlands and hills and a structure, and then it went down to the sea. The 3D mapping is interesting because back to the water problem, one of the things is to first look at where the natural flows of water are going to go. You know, as you said, we can't take we can't take a map every day of the year. And so one, to see that in the landscape, and then two, to essentially work around it as opposed to trying to then divert it or do anything else. And so that's my thought process. But I guess my question really was that with the tools that you've been using, do you have any sense of where those tools are limited in terms of scale? If we take a ranch in the Rockies, you know, I know people from all over the place, but you just get the idea, you know. So you've got elevations all over the place. You've got all kinds of stuff going on. You've got forest. You've got, you know, places where the water runs down. You've got some structures. You've got some dirt roads. I mean, you get the idea, right? So of course, with Google Earth and Google Maps, you can get the, you know, the two-dimensional, you know, structure. But what was very interesting about your example was getting that three-dimensional view and being able to literally rotate it. And so I'm trying to think that if I had something very large, how would we capture that type of concept on a, let's say, a scale, I don't know, I'll take a guess, 10 times larger, maybe 5 times larger. I'm not sure what the exact size of that was. It wasn't small, you know, but it also was not a mountainside. Do you have any idea where the limitations are on what you did?
Yeah, so my experience is it started on a very small scale. Like my garden is a
I
fifth of
saw
an
that
acre.
part.
So it's a fifth of an acre. It's really about, it was about forest garden at small kind of family scale, like on a fifth of an acre piece of land. My friends' farms were a bit bigger, like 20 acres or so. But the tools that I was using, I would say it depends on what the ultimate objective is. If you want to use the maps to build actual buildings, then
Actually, I'll stop you because maybe you can answer the question better. The purpose is exactly the opposite, is to do a land assessment that we can have planning and things before we actually touch anything, before we go in and do anything at all, is to have a very, very good assessment of what the land is about, and as you said, climate comes and goes and changes and all of that. So when you take your piece and you did your scanning and you put it into the software, I guess what I'm trying to imagine is that if I did that 10 times in 10 different places, is there does do these systems actually, are they GPS aware enough to go, oh yeah, well, this was taken here, that was taken here, and I can merge this together into one. In fact, maybe you did it in more than one take. I don't even know. I'm talking about the larger
Yes.
scale.
All those flights were in one take,
They
but
were
you
in one
can
take,
you
okay.
can do it. You can combine it. I think Will has made some interesting points in the chat about using fixed wing, so that as you scale up, there's different types of drones you can use, and fixed wing drones are like, they look more like planes. They've got like two wings and they can cover a much larger area. Once you get up to kind of commercial scale, thousands of acres covering in a few days. There are people out there doing this. I'm also curious, like, who's still in the call. Danilo, I don't know if Neil is still here. Well, I'm wondering, Danilo, if you have anything to add on this question from Andrew about, like, if you want to scan a piece of land or you want to like map a piece of land that's very mountainous and at scale, any recommendations on how best to go about that?
Yeah, great presentation, Kris. Thank you. Yeah, for those cases, I mean, I think if you want to assess the topography for a big piece of land in that kind of area, the first thing will be to try to find if there is already LiDAR available. For contour map generator, basically contour map generator takes digital elevation models and creates different topography layers that are very easy to understand. And that's what we do. So we...
I'm sorry, Daniela, what was that called?
Contour map generator
Contour
.com.
map.
That's the tool that
Oh,
Kris
I saw
mentioned.
it. I wrote that down. I got that. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so that one uses have data for the whole planet, and it starts like the data available everywhere is satellite data, and that's not very good resolution. It's 30 meters.
I have that. It's not great.
Yeah, so that's not, that depends on the use case. If it's a very large property and you want to have a big picture, it works. But
Agreed.
if it's a smaller piece of land, it wouldn't be great. But for other areas, like for the US, there's LiDAR coverage and it's open.
I'm sorry, Daniela, where are you from? You said our areas. Where are you?
Where I am?
You said our areas. I don't know where you are.
Oh, sorry. What I don't know what they said, but what they meant is for the US, there's LiDAR available for.
Well,
usually
yeah, I'm aware,
for,
but LiDAR actually is very limited in range. You have to keep moving them around. So actually, let me just change the example very slightly, because I think maybe I made this too extreme. So take a vineyard. Okay, everybody's familiar with that, right? So vineyards aren't flat. You know, it's not like one big flat thing. Maybe there's some, the ones I've been to. There's a hill over here, and then the land grades. It goes, you know, some of the land runs down a little bit, and then there's wet areas and dry areas and whatever. So I didn't want to make it sound so complicated. What I'm trying to address is the ability to take anything. It's just that I know there's a limited range to the equipment Kris uses, but the equipment knows where it is. So will that software piece it back together effectively, you know, or something like that? I mean, LiDAR is very precise. And yeah, if I was going to do a building or something like very, you know, I'm really looking at planning before we do anything. So I know exactly what you're saying about LiDAR. I'm very familiar with LiDAR. So does that make any sense?
I guess so. What they meant is that I would check first before flying anything. I would check if there's already something available, LiDAR or.
Right. I'll assume there isn't for the moment,
Okay.
because we would
Yeah.
know
In case
that.
you need to to fly something.
No, I'm just saying if we go to a piece of land like I'm thinking of a ranch that I know of, but and they would tell us if they would just give us every study they ever had. So
The typical
Will, go ahead.
landowner, the typical landowner's not gonna know. Like there's a lot of publicly available data that the landowners don't have and don't know exists. And so like there's like a national mapping program that do like flights every few years. There's it's called like the national
Will,
map.
you
I'll
mean
sell it in a second.
you mean topographical? Will, topographical data?
All kinds, like topo, ortho images, yeah, all
Right.
kinds.
Yeah. So I think
Because I mean, this is a call about regenerative, and so what our projects are all about, looking at the land first, and working with the land, and not disturbing the natural mechanisms that are in place. In fact, sometimes repairing them if necessary. So that's where my whole conversation's going.
And that piece of land is in the US.
I mean, we have some of our teams in Colombia right now, but I mean, I don't think this matters where it is, but we're looking, we got to put a framework around something. So because we have all kinds of financial things and legal things, we're trying to build a framework just for the US for the moment. But as I said, we've got a project going in Mexico, we got a project going in Colombia, and I don't know if those tools are useful there. I'm not the one in Colombia at the moment, so I'm looking for the tool set, to solve the problems that we're all talking about.
Yeah.
With any GIS software, you can merge any different like pieces of data that you have for a property. If you have to do many flights, you can merge that without any problem with any like QGIS, any GIS software. What changes depending on the country is the availability of existing LiDAR data. Like in the US, it's great. In Colombia and Mexico,
Really?
it's not.
Okay, I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay,
The US,
I didn't realize it was that universal in the US. Okay.
Yeah, it's close to full coverage, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, it's really good resolution usually. So you can check the USGS site.
Mm-hmm.
And contour map generator already access most of that data.
I'll do a little homework. Thank you.
And just briefly to pick up on your point about the 3D modeling, I think if you want to take it to that level and have big 3D models, you could do this at scale. It would just take time. You just have to do it like one flight at a time. The batteries on the Phantom 4 Pro last like about 20 to 30 minutes. So depending on how high you go, if you want to do a model, you need to be pretty low, like maybe 50 meters above the ground. So it would take you a while if you were doing like hundreds of acres, but it could be done. Certainly.
But as you pointed out, tell me if I'm wrong, I was following your thing. You had a pattern that you did, but you did it to get much better resolution. So we could start, if I'm not mistaken, we could start at a much higher altitude, accept less resolution, but have less maps to assemble back together. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
But I think that, like, to come back to Danilo's point, once you get to a certain point of resolution, there's likely to be existing data already out there that's at that resolution at a certain level.
Of course.
Because the ground sampling distance, the higher you go with the drone, is going to get less and less. So there's a point where you would actually cross over with like potentially some very high quality satellite data that's out there.
That's very good, because then I just realized that the 3D aspect of it is going to be lost the higher you go.
Yeah,
you're going to lose the 3D ability to generate accurate 3D.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay, thank you. sorry to take this up, but I just thought that's where the conversation
No
was
worries at
going.
all. It's super interesting. It's been a great discussion. I think I'm just gonna pull things together briefly. I think John's off, but see you later, John. Glad you made it. I was gonna say actually before we move on, Andrew, do you know? Have you met Neil before? Neil Smith from Fifth World.
I'm like new to this group. I don't know anyone's name or I can't even remember where you crossed my path. I think it came through on something from I was at a regen conference. I don't remember where this came up.
Right. If you
It
go to
looked
if you want to have a conversation, there's this a consultant lead, Neil, from fifthworld.com. If you want to have a conversation about this in more detail, he was in the call at the start. Unfortunately, he dropped out.
okay.
But if you want to have a
What's
call with him,
Neil's last name is what?
it's Smith.
Neil
I think.
Smith. Okay, I can
Yeah.
remember that. I'll never find him, Neil Smith, but I can remember it. I'm just kidding.
If you drop,
Fifthworld.com.
there's a form
I
on
got
the fifthworld.com website.
I got it.
If
That's all right.
you ping him, I'm sure you could have an
Okay.
interesting conversation. He's got a lot of experience in mapping designing big pieces of land for regenerative ecosystems. Before we wrap though, Daniel, is there anything else you want to say about Contour Map Generator? I know we said we'd come back to it.
I can say a few words about that. So yeah, in that tool, it's a very simple tool that you can go and it's contourmapgenerator.com. You see the map of the world. You can zoom into your property, the area of interest, and then you can get previews of the contour lines. And that's using, as I mentioned before, SRTM, low resolution in some areas, but in other areas it's using LiDAR, like the US, UK, and other parts of the world. And yeah, it will show you the contours with the available data, and then you can get a package. You can purchase a contour line file for Google Earth Pro, which is like pretty accessible, like $19 Canadian dollars. And then you can also access the full, like the comprehensive package, which have much more layers.
And Daniela, what was the part earlier that Kris brought up about people gathering data and then contributing data back to a greater pool of data that everyone, essentially share? What was that about? It was
maybe
way
you
back
can.
at the beginning.
So that's a Web3 project called Spexy.com. That we're not involved in that in any way with V DAO, but we respect what they're doing, and it's quite exciting. It's an exciting approach that they're taking.
Because we're doing that with some soil samples and some agricultural, essentially academic institutions who will trade essentially data for information, if you know what I mean. Anyway. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much for the time.
So just to finish the idea on Contour Map Generator, that's available. The nice thing about that product is that it makes very accessible this data. You don't need any specific knowledge. You just draw your property and then you get the file for Google Earth Pro. And it also works with custom data. So if you fly your drone, or there's another source of LiDAR data, for example, it can also work with that. So for regenerative land design, permaculture design, it's very useful tool that makes the thing simple, and you don't need to learn to use GIS tools or to get into that. Cool. And if you have any questions about it, you can write me.
Okay.
And my mail is danilo@fifthworld.farm.
Okay. It was just one example. We're looking at, what for the tool sets that solve problems. If you know what I'm saying, and I'm saying about the water flow and all that kind of stuff that in Chris's example.
Yeah, one of the layers. So contour matching editor has two layers about that. One is the property watershed. It shows you that it extracts that from the elevation information, and there's also the big watershed information that's comes from another database, but it shows where in the watershed the property is located. So you can see, like, if you are close to a water stream, you can see where that water is coming from.
Okay, super.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
Is your Danielo, is your contact here, or I could reach out on LinkedIn or whatever whatever's easy.
Yeah, my mail is on the chat if you want to
Oh,
reach out.
oh, okay. I'll look back up. I'm sorry.
I'll also drop Neil's details in there as well. Thanks a lot for all the really interesting questions and the discussion. I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating. I think we'll be, just to wrap things up, we'll be coming back to think more about water systems and like water management next week at our Community Voices event inside V DAO. That's been led by Steve and a couple of other. I think Will, you're also doing that, right? Yeah, Will, Will and Steve plus Michelle Avis is going to do a short presentation on rainwater harvesting, which we're excited about. That's happening next week, next Tuesday. We've got one event per week with V DAO. Throughout just on an ongoing basis, all around the topic of regenerative living. But yeah, I would just like to thank everyone for coming along today. It was great to meet you all. Great to chat about drone mapping with you. And yeah, thanks a lot. See you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.